Marcus Richardson was laughing. It was that confident, careless kind of laugh that comes from a man who thinks he's already won. The conference room at Richardson Transport's headquarters had the smell of expensive whiskey and leather chairs, and Marcus was doing what he did best, entertaining his business partners with stories from his past. But this particular story, the one about his ex-wife Sarah, was his favorite. He'd told it a dozen times, always to the same roaring laughter. "You should have seen her," he said, leaning back in his chair with a grin that reached his eyes. Always buried in that laptop with these ridiculous business ideas. Data this, algorithm that. "I told her, Sarah, nobody's going to take you seriously in the real world." The men around the table laughed, clinking their glasses. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that in exactly 4 minutes, the woman he was mocking would walk through that door. Not as the struggling ex-wife he remembered, not as the woman he'd abandoned 7 months pregnant with triplets, but as Sarah Bennett, founder and CEO of Apex Solutions, the only company on Earth that could save his dying business from complete collapse. And she'd be bringing their 5-year-old children with her, children who barely remembered their father's face. This is a story about humiliation and redemption, about a woman who turned her darkest moment into her greatest triumph, and about a man who learned far too late that the person you underestimate today might be the one holding your future in their hands tomorrow. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. This is the story of how one woman's devastating betrayal became the foundation of a billion-dollar empire, and how karma arrived not as revenge, but as pure, undeniable competence. What happens when the person you dismissed as weak becomes powerful beyond measure? When the woman you called not ready for the real world builds an empire that makes yours look like a child's lemonade stand? Sarah Bennett's journey from abandoned pregnant wife to billionaire CEO wasn't luck. It wasn't inheritance. It was 5 years of relentless determination, sleepless nights, and a mind so brilliant that Fortune 500 companies would eventually pay millions just to access her insights. But on that cold February morning in 2020, when Marcus walked out of their Boston home for the last time, Sarah had nothing but a negative bank balance, 3 babies growing inside her, and a laptop containing an algorithm that would change everything. How did she do it? How does someone go from rock bottom to the top of the business world while raising triplets alone? And more importantly, what happens when the man who abandoned her realizes that his only path to survival runs directly through the woman he destroyed? The answer lies in a story that began not with success, but with the kind of betrayal that either breaks you completely or forges you into something unbreakable. Sarah Bennett was about to discover which one she was. Let's go back to the beginning, to a time when Sarah Richardson, not yet Bennett again, still believed in the fairy tale. It was 2016, and she just graduated from MIT with a master's degree in data analytics. She was brilliant, quietly so, the kind of person who could spot patterns in chaos that others couldn't see. Marcus had met her at a business school mixer. He was getting his MBA, working on what he called his empire, a logistics company his father had started but never quite made successful. Marcus was charming, confident, the kind of man who walked into a room and made people believe he had all the answers. Sarah was drawn to that confidence. She'd spent her whole life being the smart one, the analytical one, the one who saw problems before they happened. Marcus seemed like he saw opportunities instead. They got married 6 months later, a small ceremony in Cape Cod with both families present. Sarah's mother had pulled her aside that day, held her hand, and said something Sarah wouldn't understand until much later. "Sweetheart, make sure you never make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger." At the time, Sarah had laughed it off, but over the next 4 years of marriage, those words would echo in her mind with increasing frequency. Marcus took over Richardson Transport when his father retired in 2017. The company moved freight up and down the East Coast. Nothing glamorous, but it was profitable enough, pulling in about $8 million annually. Marcus was proud of it, spent his days networking with clients, taking them to expensive dinners, golfing on weekends. He was good at the performance of business, the handshakes, and the confidence. Sarah worked as a senior data analyst for a struggling supply chain consulting firm. The kind of place where brilliant people did invisible work for companies that took all the credit. She was good at her job, exceptional even, but she felt like she was solving the wrong problems. Every night, after Marcus fell asleep watching sports highlights, Sarah would open her laptop and work on something else, something that felt like hers. She called it Foresight. It started as a curiosity, a side project. Sarah had noticed something during her work supply chains weren't just breaking because of obvious problems like weather or strikes. They were breaking because of tiny, invisible patterns that compounded over time. A supplier in Malaysia hiring temp workers during a specific season. A shipping company quietly rotating out experienced captains. A port authority changing inspection protocols without announcement. Individually, these things meant nothing. But Sarah's algorithm could track thousands of these microsignals simultaneously, analyzing them against historical data, news reports, social media mentions, even weather patterns and political stability indexes. Foresight could predict supply chain disruptions months before they happened, sometimes with accuracy that even scared Sarah a little. She'd tried to show Marcus once, back in 2018, when the algorithm was still rough but promising. She'd been so excited, staying up until 3 a.m. to prepare a presentation. She waited until he was in a good mood, after a successful meeting with a client, and she'd pulled up the laptop at the dinner table. "Marcus, I want to show you something I've been working on. I think it could really change things for Richardson Transport." Marcus had glanced at the screen, his fork halfway to his mouth. Graphs, heat maps, predictive models. His eyes glazed over almost immediately. "That's nice, honey," he'd said, not even bothering to put down the fork. "But you know how I feel about this computer stuff. Real business happens with handshakes and relationships, not algorithms. People trust people, not machines." Sarah had felt something crack inside her that night, something small but significant. She'd closed the laptop without another word, and she never showed him her work again. Instead, she poured herself deeper into Foresight, working late into the night, teaching herself advanced machine learning, building something she was starting to believe could be extraordinary. And then February 2020 arrived, and with it, the moment that would change everything. Sarah had been feeling exhausted for weeks, more tired than usual, and finally decided to see a doctor. The appointment was on a Thursday afternoon. She'd taken the afternoon off work, expecting maybe a vitamin deficiency or stress. The doctor had smiled at her, the kind of smile that carries news that changes your life. "Ms. Richardson, you're pregnant, about 9 weeks along." Sarah's heart had leapt. They'd talked about kids someday, but this was unexpected. And then the doctor had pulled up the ultrasound image, and the smile had grown wider. "Actually, congratulations are in order. You're carrying triplets." The room had spun. Triplets. 3 babies. Sarah had driven home in a daze, her mind racing through logistics and finances and joy and terror all at once. She'd picked up Marcus's favorite takeout, opened a bottle of sparkling cider, and waited for him to come home. When he walked through the door at 7:30, loosening his tie, she'd been unable to contain herself. "Marcus, sit down. I have news." He'd looked at her, curious, maybe a little concerned. "What's going on? Everything okay?" "More than okay," she'd said, her hands shaking with excitement and nerves. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." She'd watched his face carefully, searching for joy, for excitement. Instead, she saw his expression freeze, then carefully rearrange itself into something neutral. "Pregnant," he'd repeated, like he was testing the word. "Yes, well, actually, triplets. We're having 3 babies, Marcus. Can you believe it?" The silence that followed felt like a physical thing, pressing down on the room. Marcus had walked to the kitchen counter, poured himself a drink bourbon, neat, and taken a long swallow before turning back to her. "Triplets," he'd said finally. "Sarah, this is bad timing." Those 4 words were like a punch to her stomach. Bad timing? "The company's struggling," he'd continued, not meeting her eyes. "We're barely breaking even this quarter. I've got creditors asking questions, partners getting nervous. I can't handle a family crisis right now." "A family crisis?" Sarah's voice had risen. "Marcus, this is our family. This is wonderful news. We'll figure out the logistics. People do this all the time. People with money do this," he'd cut her off. People with stable companies and savings accounts and health insurance that's actually good. We're not those people right now. Sarah? She'd stared at him, seeing her husband clearly maybe for the first time. We have savings. We have the house. We'll make it work together. But even as she said it, she could see him pulling away, retreating into himself. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became a stranger in their own home. He worked late, went out with clients, came home smelling like cigars and whiskey. He slept in the guest room, claiming he didn't want to disturb her rest. Sarah was 3 months pregnant when Marcus finally said the words out loud. It was a Saturday morning, early March, and Sarah was making breakfast, trying to pretend everything was normal. Marcus came into the kitchen, already dressed for the day, car keys in hand. "We need to talk," he'd said, and his tone made Sarah's blood run cold. She'd turned off the stove, sat down at the kitchen table, her hands instinctively moving to her stomach, where 3 tiny lives were growing. Marcus sat across from her, but wouldn't look at her directly. "I can't do this, Sarah. The marriage, the kids, any of it. I'm not ready to be a father." Sarah had felt the floor drop out from beneath her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm leaving. My lawyer will send divorce papers. This isn't working, and I need to focus on saving my business." "Your business?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Marcus, we're talking about our children, 3 babies." "Your children," he'd corrected, and the cruelty of those 2 words would haunt Sarah for years. "I'll pay child support, whatever the court says I have to pay. But I can't be a husband right now. I can't be a father. I'm barely keeping my company alive." He'd stood up, grabbed a bag Sarah hadn't noticed by the door, already packed, and walked toward the exit. At the threshold, he'd paused without turning around. "You can keep the house. I'll take half the savings. That's fair. My lawyer will handle the details." And then Marcus Richardson walked out, leaving his pregnant wife sitting alone in a kitchen that still smelled like unfinished breakfast. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later. Sarah, now 7 months pregnant, had sat on the bathroom floor reading them through tears that wouldn't stop. Marcus was taking $95,000 of their $190,000 in savings. The house was hers, but so was the mortgage. He'd agreed to pay child support once the children were born, the bare minimum the state required. That night, Sarah had called her best friend Lauren, the only person she trusted with the whole truth. "He just left," Sarah had said, her voice hollow. 7 months pregnant, and he just walked away. Lauren had been furious, ready to drive over immediately, but Sarah had stopped her. "I don't need comfort right now. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. I have $95,000, a mortgage, and in 2 months, I'm going to have 3 babies who need everything. I can't fall apart. I don't have that luxury." After they hung up, Sarah had sat in the darkness of her bedroom, one hand on her swollen belly, the other on her closed laptop. And she'd made a decision that would change the trajectory of her entire life. She wasn't going to grieve, not yet. She was going to build. Sarah Bennett. She'd already started using her maiden name again, gave birth to Emma, Olivia, Ann Jackson on a Tuesday in late April 2020. The pandemic was raging, hospitals were chaotic, and Sarah labored alone because visitors weren't allowed. No husband, no family. Just Sarah and 3 tiny humans who depended entirely on her. Marcus didn't come to the hospital. He didn't call. 3 weeks after the birth, while Sarah was drowning in diapers and sleepless nights, and a kind of exhaustion that felt like dying, she received a text message. Not even a phone call, a text. "Divorce finalized. Child support starts next month. Good luck." Sarah had stared at that message while holding Jackson, who was crying from gas pains, with Emma and Olivia asleep in bassinets on either side of her. The house was a disaster. She hadn't showered in 2 days. Her savings account, which had started at $95,000, was now at $78,000 after medical bills and the first month of formula, diapers, and emergency expenses she hadn't anticipated. At that moment, sitting in a house that was too quiet except for her son's cries, Sarah had a choice. She could give up, call her family, admit she couldn't do this, maybe move back home, let Marcus's abandonment define the rest of her life. Or she could fight. Sarah chose to fight. The first thing Sarah did was reach out to Professor Helen Crawford, her former thesis advisor at MIT. Dr. Crawford was now on the board of directors at Consolidated Manufacturing, a Fortune 500 company that supplied parts to automotive and aerospace industries. Sarah sent an email at 2:30 in the morning while feeding all 3 babies simultaneously, a skill she'd developed through pure desperation. The email was direct. Dr. Crawford, I have an algorithm that can predict supply chain disruptions 3 to 6 months in advance. I can prove it works. Give me 45 days to analyze your company's supply network. If I don't identify at least $5 million in potential savings or avoided losses, you pay me nothing. If I succeed, I want funding to build a company. Sincerely, Sarah Bennett. Sarah hit send and then immediately had a panic attack because it felt absurd, reaching out to a Fortune 500 board member while sitting in stained pajamas surrounded by screaming infants. But 36 hours later, Dr. Crawford called. Sarah, I saw your email. I'll be honest, I almost deleted it. But then I remembered your thesis, how you could see patterns nobody else saw. Tell me about this algorithm. Sarah had exactly 1 hour before the next feeding cycle. She put the triplets in their bouncy seats, set up her laptop, and gave the most important presentation of her life to an audience of 1 via video call. She showed Dr. Crawford the basics of Foresight, how it aggregated thousands of data points, supplier hiring patterns, port efficiency metrics, political stability indicators, weather anomalies, even social media sentiment around labor conditions. Traditional supply chain management is reactive, Sarah explained, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. By the time you know there's a problem, you're already losing money. Foresight is predictive. It tells you what's going to break before it breaks. Dr. Crawford had been silent for a long moment, studying the data on her screen. You're telling me this algorithm can see problems months in advance? I'm telling you it already has, Sarah said. I've been running it on public data from major companies for 2 years. In late 2019, it flagged a Malaysian shipping port as high risk due to labor instability indicators. In January 2020, that port had a major strike that shut down operations for 43 days. Companies that relied on that port lost hundreds of millions in delayed shipments. Dr. Crawford's eyes had sharpened. Can you do this for Consolidated? Give me access to your supply chain data and 45 days, Sarah had said. I'll show you exactly where you're vulnerable and how to fix it. There was a long pause, and then Dr. Crawford had smiled. You have 30 days, not 45. And Sarah, don't make me regret this. The connection ended, and Sarah had sat there in stunned silence before Jackson started crying, bringing her back to reality. She had 30 days to prove she wasn't crazy, 30 days to build something from nothing, 30 days to change 3 tiny lives that were depending on her. Sarah hired a part-time nanny with money she couldn't afford to spend and got to work. For the next 4 weeks, she lived on 4 hours of sleep, analyzing Consolidated Manufacturing's supply chain data with the intensity of someone who knew this was her only shot. She fed babies and wrote code, changed diapers and built predictive models, existed in a strange twilight between new motherhood and the most important work of her life. And she found something extraordinary. 23 days into her analysis, at 3 a.m, while rocking Olivia back to sleep, Sarah's algorithm flagged a critical vulnerability. One of Consolidated's key suppliers in Malaysia was showing the exact same patterns Sarah had identified in early 2020. Increased use of temporary labor, subtle changes in management structure, rising social media chatter about workplace conditions, local news reports, barely noticed by English-speaking observers, mentioning worker dissatisfaction. Foresight gave it a 94% probability of major disruption within the next 45 days. Sarah immediately called Dr. Crawford, despite the hour. I found something. It's urgent. The next morning, Sarah presented her findings to Consolidated's executive team via video conference, 3 babies visible in bassinets behind her. Some of the executives had looked skeptical, clearly wondering why they were taking advice from a woman in a home office with crying infants in the background. But Sarah's data was irrefutable. She walked them through every indicator, every pattern, every reason why they needed to immediately shift 40% of their procurement to alternate suppliers. You have maybe 3 weeks, Sarah had said, her voice calm but firm. After that, you'll be competing with every other company that figures this out, and alternative capacity will be gone. Consolidated's head of operations, a man named Robert Chen, had pushed back. Ms. Bennett, our team in Malaysia says everything's fine. We've worked with this supplier for 12 years. I think you might be overreacting to some minor data points." Sarah had looked directly into the camera. "Mr. Chen, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to look at the data. Every single indicator I'm showing you preceded major disruptions in the past. If I'm wrong, you've diversified your supply base, which is good practice anyway. If I'm right, I'm saving you tens of millions of dollars." Dr. Crawford had intervened. "We're making the shift. Robert, start the process today." It was the longest 3 weeks of Sarah's life. She'd put her entire credibility on the line, and if she was wrong, she'd be back to square one with 3 babies and dwindling savings. But Sarah wasn't wrong. 32 days after Sarah's presentation, the Malaysian supplier experienced a major labor action. Workers walked out over wage disputes that had been quietly building for months. The facility shut down completely. It would remain closed for 87 days, one of the longest supply disruptions in the region's history. Companies that depended on that supplier lost a combined $240 million in delayed shipments, canceled contracts, and emergency sourcing at inflated prices. Consolidated Manufacturing, because they'd listened to Sarah, lost nothing. They'd shifted their orders weeks before the crisis hit. In fact, they'd secured alternative capacity at better prices than they'd been paying before. Dr. Crawford called Sarah the day the news broke. "Sarah, we just ran the numbers. You saved us $14.2 million, probably more when we account for the contracts we would have lost." Sarah, holding Emma while trying to stop Jackson from pulling Olivia's hair, had felt tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for believing in me. I need you to come to New York next week. There are some people you need to meet. Dr. Crawford, I have 3 4-month-old babies. I can't just travel to New York." "Bring them," Dr. Crawford had said simply. "Sarah, you just did something that billion-dollar consulting firms couldn't do. These people need to meet you. Trust me." 1 week later, Sarah found herself in a conference room at a Manhattan office building with Emma, Olivia, and Jackson in a triple stroller, facing 5 executives from some of the largest companies in America. Dr. Crawford made the introductions, and then Sarah, with all the confidence she could gather while dressed in her only professional outfit that still fit post-pregnancy, gave a presentation that would change her life. She explained Foresight in detail, not just what it did, but how it worked, why it was different, why it mattered. She showed them case studies, predictions, the mathematical models underlying the algorithm. And then she made an offer. "I'm not looking to be a consultant," Sarah said clearly. "I'm looking to build a company, a platform that companies can license to protect their own supply chains. I need $2 million in seed funding and commitments from founding clients. In exchange, I'm offering you access to the most sophisticated supply chain intelligence platform in the world." One of the executives, a woman named Patricia Kim from a major pharmaceutical company, had leaned forward. "And what happens if we say no and just build this ourselves?" Sarah had smiled, a real smile for the first time in months. "You can try. I've been building Foresight for 3 years. I have proprietary data sources, custom machine learning models, and relationships with information providers across 6 continents. You could replicate some of what I do in maybe 3 years, spending tens of millions of dollars, and you'd still be behind where I am right now. Or you can partner with me today." Jackson had chosen that moment to start crying. Sarah had calmly reached down, picked him up, and continued her presentation while holding her son, not missing a beat. Later, Patricia Kim would tell Sarah that it was that moment, watching Sarah command a room full of powerful executives while holding a crying baby, that made her decide to invest. By the end of that meeting, Sarah had commitments for $2.4 million in funding and contracts from 3 Fortune 500 companies. The next 6 months were a controlled explosion of activity. Sarah hired her first employee, a brilliant data scientist named Michael Torres, who'd been bored at a big consulting firm. Then came 2 more analysts, a software developer, and eventually an office manager who helped Sarah figure out how to run an actual company. Apex Solutions officially launched in November 2020. Sarah ran the company from a small office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, bringing the triplets to work every day until they were old enough for daycare. Those early days were chaos, late-night coding sessions, client presentations, diaper changes in the conference room, Emma learning to walk by pulling herself up on server racks. But Foresight worked. It kept working. By the end of year one, Apex Solutions had 17 clients and had generated $6.2 million in revenue. By year two, they had 53 clients across 8 industries. Revenue hit $28 million. Sarah hired a proper leadership team, moved to a bigger office, and started getting attention from the business press. By year three, Apex Solutions was the fastest growing supply chain intelligence platform in North America. The algorithm had gotten smarter, incorporating AI and machine learning advances. It could now predict disruptions with 97% accuracy up to 4 months in advance. Companies were saving hundreds of millions of dollars by acting on Apex's insights. Sarah had done something that very few people ever do. She'd taken a moment of complete devastation and turned it into something transformative, but she never forgot where she came from. Every night, no matter how late she worked, Sarah went home to Emma, Olivia, and Jackson. She read them bedtime stories, helped with homework as they got older, went to every parent-teacher conference and soccer game. She built her empire around her children, not despite them. By early 2024, 4 years after Marcus had walked out, Apex Solutions was valued at $340 million. Sarah's personal net worth had crossed $100 million. She was featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and MIT Technology Review. But the number that mattered most to Sarah wasn't in any magazine. It was the child support payment that arrived every month from Marcus Richardson, $2,000, split 3 ways for 3 children he'd abandoned. Sarah put every penny into college funds for Emma, Olivia, and Jackson. She never touched it, never needed it. It was a reminder, deposited monthly, of exactly how wrong Marcus had been about everything. While Sarah Bennett was building an empire, Marcus Richardson was watching his world crumble in slow motion. Richardson Transport, the company Marcus had been so desperate to save that he'd abandoned his pregnant wife, was dying. It had started with the pandemic. Supply chains worldwide had collapsed, and logistics companies either adapted or disappeared. Marcus, who'd always relied on relationships and handshakes rather than data and technology, found himself completely unprepared for a world where old ways of doing business didn't work anymore. His clients were demanding real-time tracking, predictive analytics, and integration with sophisticated inventory management systems. Marcus had none of that. He'd spent the last 4 years doubling down on what he knew: personal relationships, golf games, expensive client dinners. But when the world moved online and supply chains became digital, Marcus's charm couldn't compete with companies that had invested in technology. By 2021, Richardson Transport had lost 30% of its client base. By 2022, the company was losing money every quarter. Marcus had brought in partners, selling 40% of the business to a private equity group in exchange for capital and management expertise. It bought him time, but cost him control. The partners, Michael Torres and Jennifer Liu, were younger, smarter, and increasingly frustrated with Marcus's refusal to modernize. By 2023, they were barely speaking, and then 2024 arrived, bringing with it the crisis that would force Marcus to face everything he'd been running from. In March 2024, Richardson Transport lost its 3 largest clients in the same week. All 3 cited the same reason: the company's inability to provide predictive supply chain intelligence. One client specifically mentioned they were switching to a competitor who used something called Apex Solutions. Marcus had never heard of it. The loss of those 3 clients pushed Richardson Transport into genuine danger. The company was now losing $400,000 per month. The partners called an emergency meeting at Marcus's office on a Friday afternoon. Marcus had sat at the head of his conference table, the same table where he'd once felt so confident, and listened to Jennifer lay out the reality. "Marcus, we're out of runway. We have maybe 90 days before we have to start liquidating assets. We need a solution, and we need it now." Michael had been more direct. "We need to modernize. That means predictive analytics, real-time supply chain monitoring, the technology our competitors have been using for years, the technology you've been refusing to invest in." Marcus had bristled. "I built this company on relationships. That's what matters in this business, not some computer algorithm." "Your relationships just left us," Jennifer had snapped, all 3 of them. "And they left because we can't give them what they need. Wake up, Marcus. It's 2024, not 1994. The meeting had ended badly, with Marcus insisting he could turn things around and his partners making it clear they didn't believe him. That night, alone in his office, Marcus had finally done what he should have done years ago. He'd researched what his competitors were doing, and he'd discovered Apex Solutions. The company's website was sophisticated, professional, client testimonials from Fortune 500 companies, case studies showing millions saved through predictive supply chain intelligence, a leadership team that read like a who's who of MIT and Stanford graduates. And at the top, listed as founder and CEO, a name that made Marcus's blood run cold: Sarah Bennett. It couldn't be the same person. His ex-wife Sarah, the woman who'd been working on some ridiculous algorithm while they were married? That couldn't possibly be the same person running a company that was clearly worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Marcus had clicked on the About page, and there she was. Professional photo, confident smile, biography that detailed her MIT education, her founding of Apex Solutions, her revolutionary work in supply chain intelligence. The woman he'd left 7 months pregnant, the woman he'd told nobody would take seriously, was now one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the industry. Marcus had sat there in shock, reading and rereading her biography, looking at interviews she'd given to business publications, watching a video of her speaking at a technology conference. This was impossible. This was Sarah, who used to nervously show him spreadsheets over dinner. Sarah, who he'd dismissed so casually. The same Sarah who was now giving keynote speeches to thousands of people about the future of global commerce. Marcus had felt something he wasn't used to feeling: genuine fear. Not fear of Sarah herself, but fear of what this meant. If Apex Solutions was as good as its reputation suggested, they were exactly what Richardson Transport needed, which meant Marcus's only path to saving his company ran directly through the woman he'd destroyed. He'd closed his laptop and poured himself a drink, his hands shaking. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus tried everything else. He contacted 5 other supply chain intelligence firms. 3 were too expensive. 1 had a 6-month waiting list. The last one, after reviewing Richardson Transport's needs, had actually said, "Have you considered Apex Solutions? They're the best in the business." Marcus had hung up without responding. His partners were getting more aggressive. Michael had started taking meetings without him. Jennifer had stopped copying him on important emails. Marcus could feel control of his own company slipping away. And there was only one solution left. On a Tuesday morning in late April 2024, Marcus had finally accepted reality. He'd called his assistant, Angela, into his office. "I need you to set up a meeting with Apex Solutions. Tell them Richardson Transport is interested in their services." Angela had typed on her tablet, then looked up. "They're based in Cambridge. I'll reach out to their business development team." "No," Marcus had said quietly. "Contact the CEO's office directly. Tell them this is urgent and we need to speak with someone at the leadership level." Angela had nodded and left. 2 days later, she'd returned with news. "Mr. Richardson, I was able to schedule a meeting. Apex Solutions can meet with us next Wednesday at 2 p.m. The CEO herself will be attending." Marcus's stomach had dropped. "The CEO is coming personally?" "Yes, sir. Her name is Sarah Bennett. According to her assistant, she handles all new strategic partnerships herself. I've confirmed the conference room is available, and I'll prepare materials for the meeting." Marcus had nodded, unable to speak. He had 5 days to figure out how to face the woman he'd abandoned, the woman whose career he'd mocked, and ask her to save his business. That weekend, Marcus had done something he hadn't done in years. He'd thought seriously about his marriage to Sarah, about the way it had ended. He'd been so focused on his own panic, his own fears about becoming a father, that he'd never really considered what he'd done to her. He'd left her 7 months pregnant, with triplets. He'd taken half their savings and walked away from 3 children who carried his DNA. What kind of man does that? Marcus had always justified it to himself. He wasn't ready, the timing was bad, he had to save his company. But sitting alone in his apartment, really thinking about it for the first time, he realized those weren't reasons. They were excuses. And they were pathetic. The Monday before the meeting, Marcus had done something that made him feel even worse. He'd searched for information about Sarah's children. It didn't take long. There were a few photos on Apex Solutions' social media, nothing intrusive, just occasional mentions of work-life balance. But he found one photo from a company holiday party that made him stop breathing. 3 children, clearly identical triplets, maybe 4 or 5 years old. 2 girls and a boy, all wearing matching outfits, standing next to Sarah, who was smiling with her arms around them. Emma, Olivia, and Jackson, his children. Children he'd seen maybe 6 times in 5 years. Mostly awkward supervised visits in the first year after the divorce, when his lawyer had insisted he maintain some contact. Children he paid exactly $2,000 a month to support, the bare minimum the state required. Children who didn't know him, who probably didn't even think of him as their father. Marcus had stared at that photo for a long time, and for the first time since the divorce, he'd felt something that might have been shame. The day before the meeting, Marcus had made a decision. He'd invited his partners, Michael and Jennifer, to his office for drinks. He needed to blow off steam, to feel like himself before facing Sarah. And he needed to tell the story again, the one about his disaster ex-wife, because somehow telling it made him feel less like he'd made a terrible mistake. Michael and Jennifer had arrived at 6 p.m. The conference room overlooked Boston Harbor, and Marcus had set out good whiskey and expensive glasses. "Gentlemen," Marcus had said, pouring drinks, "tomorrow we're meeting with Apex Solutions. This company might be our last shot, so I need you both at your best." Jennifer had raised her glass. To last shots and desperate measures. They had laughed, and Marcus had felt the tension ease. This was familiar. This was who he was, the guy who could laugh through pressure, who could charm his way through problems. After the second drink, Michael had asked the question, "Marcus, you've been weird about this Apex meeting. What's going on? It's just a vendor pitch?" Marcus had paused, then decided to tell them. Maybe it would be better if they knew, or maybe he just needed to say it out loud, to make it into a story he could control. "The CEO of Apex Solutions, Sarah Bennett, is my ex-wife." The silence had been profound. Jennifer had put down her glass. "I'm sorry, what?" "We were married for 4 years, got divorced about 5 years ago. It was complicated, but she was always into this data stuff. Algorithms and predictions. I thought it was ridiculous. Honestly, I never thought she'd actually build something real with it." Marcus had laughed, that familiar deprecating laugh he used when he needed to deflect. "You should have seen her, always buried in that laptop with these ridiculous business ideas. I told her, 'Sarah, nobody's going to take you seriously in the real world.'" Michael had looked uncomfortable. "Marcus, this is the CEO who might save our company. Maybe we shouldn't—" "Oh, it's fine," Marcus had interrupted, pouring another round. "Sarah was sweet, but she wasn't exactly cut out for business. I mean, she had all these crazy ideas about algorithms and data analysis, but come on, real business happens with handshakes and relationships, not computers. I tried to tell her that when we were married, but she never really got it." He'd taken a drink, warming to the story now. "The marriage fell apart because she got pregnant. Terrible timing. I was trying to save this company, and she wanted to start a family. I had to make a choice, be responsible to my business, or get dragged down by domestic drama." Jennifer had raised an eyebrow. "You left her because she got pregnant?" "It was more complicated than that," Marcus had said defensively. "Look, I wasn't ready to be a father. I had a company to save. She had all these expectations, and I just couldn't do both. So I made the tough call. I left, paid my child support like I was supposed to, and focused on what mattered. And now she's a billionaire CEO who might be our only option," Michael had said quietly. Marcus had laughed again, though it sounded forced even to his own ears. "Yeah, well, luck is funny like that. She probably got lucky, caught a trend. Right place, right time, it happens." They'd continued drinking, and Marcus had continued talking, telling more stories about Sarah, how she used to practice business presentations in their bathroom mirror, how she'd get so intense about her spreadsheets, how she'd never understood that business was about people, not numbers. His partners had laughed politely, but Marcus noticed they seemed uncomfortable. Around 8:30, they had left, and Marcus had poured himself one more drink, feeling better. He'd told the story, made it funny, made Sarah into a character he could handle meeting tomorrow. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his assistant Angela had made an error in the calendar. She'd booked the conference room for 2 p.m., but she'd accidentally marked it as available starting at 1:30. And Sarah Bennett, who was always early to important meetings, had planned to arrive at 1:45 to settle in, review materials, and prepare, which meant that when Marcus was in the middle of his story, laughing about his crazy ex-wife with his business partners, Sarah was standing outside that conference room door. She'd arrived with Emma, Olivia, and Jackson, who had early dismissal from their private school and were excited to see where Mommy worked. She'd been reaching for the door handle when she heard Marcus's voice through the gap. Always buried in that laptop with these ridiculous business ideas. I told her, Sarah, nobody's going to take you seriously in the real world. And she'd stopped, her hand frozen on the door handle as she listened to her ex-husband mock her to the very people who needed her help to survive. Sarah stood in that hallway for perhaps 30 seconds, listening to Marcus laugh about her crazy ideas and how she wasn't cut out for business. She felt her children's hands in hers, Emma on her left, Olivia on her right, Jackson standing just behind her. And she felt something crystallize inside her, something cold and clear and absolutely certain. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't even about anger. This was about showing Marcus Richardson exactly what he'd dismissed, what he'd thrown away, and what he'd never understood about her in the first place. Sarah looked down at her 3 children. Emma was watching her with those sharp, intelligent eyes she'd inherited from her mother. "Mommy, why are we waiting?" Sarah smiled, calm and composed. "We're not waiting, sweetheart. We're just taking a moment." "Remember what I always tell you 3? All 3 children answered in unison, something Sarah had taught them from the time they could speak. Actions speak louder than words. "That's right," Sarah said softly. "Now, you're about to meet someone. His name is Marcus, and he's going to be very surprised to see us. I need you all to be polite and professional, just like we practiced. Can you do that for me?" 3 small heads nodded. Sarah checked her watch. 1:50 p.m. Close enough to their scheduled time. She straightened her jacket, Armani, custom-tailored, the kind of power suit that cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment. She'd worn it on purpose today, armor and statement combined. Then she opened the door. The laughter stopped the instant Sarah walked through the door. It didn't fade or trail off, it simply ceased, as if someone had cut the power to the room. Marcus turned mid-sentence, whiskey glass frozen halfway to his lips, and his face went through a sequence of expressions so rapid they were almost comical. Confusion first, because the woman in the doorway didn't match any image in his head. Then recognition, slow and dawning, then shock, then something that looked very much like he might be sick. "Sarah?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Sarah smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd spent 5 years earning the right to this exact moment. Professional, cool, absolutely in control. "Hello, Marcus, gentlemen." She nodded to Michael and Jennifer, who were staring at her with expressions that suggested they were recalculating everything Marcus had just told them. "I'm Sarah Bennett, CEO of Apex Solutions. I believe we have a 2 o'clock meeting." Behind her, 3 children walked into the room in perfect formation. 2 girls in matching navy dresses, 1 boy in a tiny suit that was clearly expensive and carefully chosen. They moved with the confidence of children who'd been raised in boardrooms and business meetings, who'd learned early that their mother's work was important, and they were part of it. Marcus's eyes went to the children, and Sarah watched him count. 1, 2, 3. Watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. Emma, Olivia, and Jackson. The triplets he'd abandoned, his children. Jennifer had recovered first, standing up with professional grace. "Ms. Bennett, it's an honor to meet you. I'm Jennifer Liu, COO of Richardson Transport. This is Michael Torres, our CFO, and Marcus Richardson, her ex-husband," Marcus finished weakly, finally finding his voice. "We were married, a long time ago." 5 years, Sarah corrected pleasantly. "Not that long, really." She gestured to her children. "Emma, Olivia, Jackson, say hello to these nice people." The triplets, age 5.5 and impossibly poised, waved in unison. "Hello," they chorused. Then Emma, the boldest of the 3, looked directly at Marcus. "Are you Mr. Marcus?" The formal address wasn't accidental. Sarah had never referred to Marcus as their father in front of the children, and Marcus had been absent enough that they'd simply absorbed her terminology. To them, he wasn't dad or daddy. He was Mr. Marcus, the man who occasionally sent birthday cards and whose name appeared on some official documents. The title hit Marcus like a slap. Sarah watched him flinch. "Yes," he managed. Yes, Mr. Marcus." "Mommy says we're here to see her work," Olivia added helpfully. "She's very good at her job." The best, Jackson confirmed with 5-year-old certainty. Sarah gestured to her assistant Rebecca, who'd been waiting in the hallway. Rebecca, could you take Emma, Olivia, and Jackson to the visitors' lounge? I believe there are coloring books and tablets set up. Of course, Ms. Bennett, Rebecca smiled at the children. Come on, you three. Let's let your mom do her work magic. As the children left, Emma turned back at the doorway. Bye, Mommy. Good luck at your meeting. Bye, Mr. Marcus, all three called, waving again before disappearing down the hall. The silence that followed their departure was suffocating. Sarah moved to the conference table with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. She set down her leather portfolio, pulled out a tablet, and connected it to the room's presentation system, all without looking at Marcus. Now then, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. I understand Richardson Transport is experiencing some challenges with supply chain predictability. Shall we discuss how Apex Solutions can help? Michael cleared his throat. Ms. Bennett, I want to apologize. We didn't realize, Marcus didn't tell us that you two had ancient history, Sarah interrupted smoothly. I'm here in a professional capacity, and I assume you are as well. Personal history is irrelevant to whether Apex can serve your company's needs. She pulled up her first slide. A clean graph showing Richardson Transport's performance metrics over the past 3 years. Marcus noticed she'd done her homework. The data was accurate, probably pulled from public filings and industry reports. Richardson Transport has lost 37% of its client base since 2021, Sarah began, her tone neither judgmental nor sympathetic, simply factual. Revenue has declined from $8.2 million annually to just under $5 million. You're currently operating at a loss of approximately $400,000 per month. At current burn rate, you have perhaps 12 weeks before you'll need to make significant structural changes or consider liquidation. Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances. The numbers were accurate to a degree that suggested Sarah had access to better intelligence than they had expected. How did you, Michael started. Public filings, client announcements, industry analysis, Sarah said. It's what we do. The question isn't how I know your situation. The question is whether you want to change it. She advanced to the next slide. The primary reason for your client losses is inability to provide predictive supply chain intelligence. Your competitors are offering real-time disruption forecasting, proactive problem solving, and data-driven decision support. You're offering traditional logistics with reactive problem solving. In today's market, that's no longer sufficient. Marcus finally found his voice. Sarah, we don't need a lecture on what we're doing wrong. Actually, you do, Sarah cut him off, and there was steel beneath the professional polish. Because from what I can see, you've spent the last 4 years doing exactly what you've always done, expecting different results. That's not a business strategy, Marcus. That's wishful thinking. She let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Apex Solutions has worked with companies in similar situations. In every case, implementation of our predictive platform has resulted in an average 37% reduction in supply chain disruptions and a 23% improvement in client satisfaction scores. For a company your size, that typically translates to stabilization within 4 months and growth resumption within 6 to 8 months. Sarah pulled up a detailed case study. Here's a comparable situation from 2022. Regional logistics company, similar revenue profile, facing client losses due to technology gaps. After Apex implementation, they recovered 80% of lost clients within 6 months and added 22 new contracts within a year. They're now considering acquisition offers. Michael leaned forward, clearly engaged despite the tension in the room. What does implementation look like? Full integration typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, Sarah explained. We'd connect to your existing systems, provide training to your operations team, and give you access to our predictive dashboard. You'd be able to see potential disruptions 3 to 4 months in advance across your entire supplier and carrier network, with recommended mitigation strategies for each scenario. Jennifer was taking notes. And the cost structure? Sarah didn't hesitate. Our standard enterprise rate for a company your size is $2.4 million annually, plus 3% of documented savings. So if we save you $10 million in avoided disruptions, you'd pay an additional $300,000. It aligns our incentives. We only make money when you make money. Marcus had been doing the math in his head. $2.4 million? Sarah, we don't have that kind of cash right now. I'm aware, Sarah said coolly, which is why I'm prepared to offer Richardson Transport a special rate. Everyone leaned forward. What kind of special rate? Jennifer asked. Sarah looked directly at Marcus, and her expression was unreadable. 2.4 million annually, plus 8% of documented savings, plus one additional condition. The increased percentage made Marcus blink. Wait, that's worse than the standard rate. What? The condition, Sarah continued, is that you, Marcus, will have no operational involvement in the implementation or ongoing relationship with Apex Solutions. All decisions, all communication, all strategic planning will go through Jennifer and Michael. You will delegate completely to your partners. The room went silent. Marcus's face flushed. You're saying I can't be involved in saving my own company? I'm saying that based on our research, your decision-making has been the primary obstacle to modernization at Richardson Transport, Sarah replied, her voice deadly calm. Every technological upgrade proposed over the last 3 years was blocked or delayed by you. Every consultant brought in to assess digital transformation was dismissed because, and I quote from one of those consultant reports, the CEO believes real business happens with handshakes, not algorithms. Marcus looked like he'd been struck. Sarah had quoted him almost word for word. So, yes, Sarah continued, my condition is that you remove yourself from the equation. Jennifer and Michael will work directly with my team. You'll still own your stake in the company, you'll still benefit from its success, but you won't interfere with the process of actually fixing what you broke. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping back. This is insane. You're using our history to... I'm using your track record, Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. Marcus, you just spent the last hour telling your partners that I was building a ridiculous company that probably got lucky. You said nobody would take me seriously. You mocked my crazy ideas about data and algorithms. And now you're sitting here, desperate for those exact same crazy ideas to save your business. Marcus's mouth opened and closed. He'd forgotten about that conversation, forgotten that Sarah would have heard it. Jennifer and Michael were looking at Marcus with expressions that suggested they were seeing him clearly for the first time. So, here's the reality, Sarah said, standing up and meeting Marcus's eyes with absolute confidence. Apex Solutions is the best in this field. We have an 87% client retention rate. We've saved our clients a combined $2.1 billion over the last 4 years, and we have a waiting list of companies who want to work with us. I don't need your business, but Jennifer and Michael do, and they seem like competent professionals who deserve a chance to save what you've been destroying. She gathered her materials with calm precision. The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, we move to the next company on our waiting list. My team will send the contract details to Jennifer and Michael this afternoon. Sarah headed for the door, then paused without turning around. Oh, and Marcus? The child support you've been sending, $2,000 a month for 3 children. I've been putting every penny into college funds for Emma, Olivia, and Jackson. They've never needed it, because I built a company that allows me to give them everything they deserve. But thank you for the... what did you call it earlier? The contribution. She walked out, and the silence she left behind was absolute. The 48 hours that followed Sarah's presentation were some of the longest of Marcus Richardson's life. He'd returned to his apartment that night in a daze, poured himself a drink he didn't finish, and sat in the darkness replaying every moment of that conference room meeting. The way Sarah had walked in, completely in control, the way his children, their children, had called him Mr. Marcus, like he was a stranger. The way she'd quoted his own words back to him, words he'd spoken not an hour before she arrived, thinking she'd never hear them, words he'd been saying for 5 years. Building a narrative where he was the reasonable one who'd made a tough choice, and Sarah was just lucky. Except, Sarah hadn't been lucky. She'd been brilliant, and he'd been too insecure to see it. Marcus didn't sleep that night. Instead, he did something he should have done years ago. He researched Sarah's company properly, not just a cursory glance, but a deep investigation into what she'd actually built. He read every article, watched every interview, studied every case study on Apex Solutions' website. What he discovered made him feel physically ill. Sarah hadn't just created a successful company, she'd revolutionized an entire industry. The algorithm she'd been trying to show him that night in 2018, the one he'd dismissed without even looking at properly, had become the foundation of a platform that was changing how global commerce worked. Major corporations were restructuring their entire supply chain strategies around Apex's predictions. Sarah had been featured in The Economist as one of the 50 most influential business leaders under 40. MIT had invited her back to give the commencement address. She'd been offered positions on multiple corporate boards, and she'd done it all while raising 3 children alone, the children he'd abandoned. Marcus pulled up photos from Sarah's rare social media posts, mostly professional, but occasionally personal. There was one from 2 years ago. Sarah in graduation robes at what looked like a preschool ceremony. Emma, Olivia, and Jackson in tiny caps and gowns, all holding diplomas. The caption read, "These 3 taught me that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up every single time. Proud doesn't begin to cover it." Marcus had been at a golf tournament that day. He remembered because he'd received a notification about the Triplets preschool graduation and had ignored it, telling himself they were too young to remember whether he was there. But Sarah had been there. Sarah had been there for everything. Another photo from 6 months ago. The Triplets at what appeared to be a Bring Your Kids to Work Day at Apex Solutions. They were sitting at a conference table wearing visitor badges, clearly delighted. The caption, "Emma asked if she could do algorithms like mommy when she grows up. Olivia wants to be CEO of a chocolate company. Jackson wants to drive trucks. I told them they can be anything they want as long as they work hard and treat people with kindness. That's the only legacy that matters." Marcus had sent them a birthday card that year. He'd signed it Dad and enclosed a check for $300, like that made up for not being there. Looking at these photos now, seeing the life Sarah had built for their children without him, Marcus felt something he'd been avoiding for 5 years. Shame. Real deep, undeniable shame. The next morning, Marcus went to his office early. He made coffee, sat at his desk, and wrote an email to Jennifer and Michael. The subject line was simple. "You're right." The body of the email was shorter. "Take the meeting with Apex, accept whatever terms they offer. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign to remove myself from operations. You two have been trying to save this company despite me, not because of me. I'm sorry for wasting your time. Do what needs to be done. Marcus." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. An hour later, Jennifer knocked on his office door. She entered without waiting for permission, Michael right behind her. "We read your email," Jennifer said, sitting down across from Marcus's desk. "We're going to accept Apex's offer, but we need to understand something first. What happened between you and Sarah?" Marcus had been expecting anger or recriminations. The quiet question caught him off guard. He took a deep breath and told them the truth. All of it. How Sarah had been working on Foresight while they were married. How he'd dismissed it without really understanding what she was building. How she'd gotten pregnant with triplets. And he'd panicked because he was drowning in business problems and couldn't handle the idea of being a father. How he'd left her 7 months pregnant, taken half their savings, and convinced himself it was the responsible choice because he had a company to save. "I told myself I was being practical," Marcus said quietly, "that I was making the hard decision to focus on what I could control. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of being a father, scared of failing, scared that Sarah was smarter than me, and I'd eventually have to admit it." He looked at his partners. "Everything I said about her yesterday, about her crazy ideas and not being ready for the real world, I said those things because they made me feel better about leaving. If Sarah was naive and unprepared, then I was justified in walking away. But she wasn't naive. She was building something extraordinary, and I was too threatened by it to support her." Jennifer had listened without interruption. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know what the sad part is?" she finally said. "If you'd believed in her, if you'd stayed and supported what she was building, you'd probably be a billionaire right now too. Apex Solutions is worth over $1 billion, Marcus. If you'd been her partner instead of her obstacle, you'd both be at the top." The thought had occurred to Marcus too, though hearing it out loud made it worse. "I know. But instead," Michael added, "you're here, watching your company die while she's on the cover of business magazines, and your kids don't even know you. That was the part that hurt most. Not the money, not even the professional failure. The fact that his children, 5 years old and beautiful and brilliant, looked at him like a stranger, called him Mr. Marcus, waved goodbye to him the way you'd wave to any adult you barely knew. "I know," Marcus said again, because there was nothing else to say. Jennifer stood up. "We're taking the Apex deal. The contract came through this morning, and we're signing it this afternoon. Your name will be on the paperwork as owner, but as stipulated, you'll have no operational role. Sarah's team starts integration next Monday." Marcus nodded. "That's the right call." "There's one more thing," Michael said. "The contract includes a clause we didn't expect. Apex is offering us a success bonus structure if we hit certain performance targets over the next 2 years. They'll reduce their percentage take and redirect those savings into employee profit sharing for Richardson transport staff." Marcus looked up sharply. "They're incentivizing you to succeed?" "Sarah is," Jennifer corrected. "She built it into the contract personally. Her assistant told me Sarah believes companies perform better when employees benefit directly from success. She's literally structuring the deal to help our people, not just take our money." Of course she was, because Sarah had always cared about doing things right, about building something sustainable and fair. It was one of the things Marcus had loved about her once, before he'd started seeing her idealism as naivety. His partners left, and Marcus sat alone in his office for a long time. The company would survive. Jennifer and Michael would work with Apex, implement the platform, and probably turn Richardson Transport around within a year. And Marcus would watch from the sidelines, a figurehead in the company he'd nearly destroyed. But there was something else Marcus needed to do, something that had nothing to do with business. 3 days after Jennifer and Michael signed the Apex contract, Marcus showed up unannounced at Apex Solutions headquarters in Cambridge. The receptionist, a young man named David, looked surprised. "Mr. Richardson, we weren't expecting you. Do you have an appointment with—" "No appointment," Marcus said. "I'm hoping Ms. Bennett has a few minutes. I understand if she doesn't want to see me, but I'd appreciate it if you could ask." David looked uncertain, but picked up the phone. "Ms. Bennett, Marcus Richardson is here in reception. He says he doesn't have an appointment, but was hoping for a few minutes of your time." There was a pause. Marcus couldn't hear Sarah's response, but he saw David's eyebrows rise. "Yes, ma'am. I'll tell him." David hung up and looked at Marcus with something that might have been sympathy. "Ms. Bennett says she can give you 10 minutes. 5th floor, corner office. Rebecca will meet you at the elevator." The elevator ride felt like it took hours. Rebecca, Sarah's assistant, greeted him with professional courtesy, but no warmth. She led him through Apex's offices, modern, bustling, filled with smart people doing important work, and to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. Sarah was standing by the window when he entered, her back to him. She didn't turn around immediately. 10 minutes, she said. "I have a board call at 3, and I don't like to be late." "Thank you for seeing me," Marcus said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." Sarah turned around then, and Marcus was struck again by how different she looked. Not just older, but stronger, more certain. "What do you want, Marcus?" Marcus had practiced this conversation in his head a dozen times, but now that he was here, all his prepared words felt inadequate. "I'm not here for forgiveness," he started. "I don't deserve it." Sarah's expression didn't change. "No, you don't. I'm here to say that you were right about everything. The algorithm, the business, your ideas. You tried to show me what you were building, and I dismissed it because I was threatened by it. By you." He took a breath. "I told myself I was being practical when I left. That I was making the hard choice to focus on saving the company. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of being a father, scared of failing, scared that you were smarter than me, and everyone would eventually realize it." Sarah listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. "So I left," Marcus continued. "I took the coward's way out. I convinced myself you'd be fine, that it was better for everyone if I just removed myself from the equation. And I spent the next 5 years building a story where I was the reasonable one who'd made a tough call, and you were just naive." He gestured to the office, to the view, to everything Apex represented. "But you weren't naive. You were building something extraordinary, and I was too insecure to see it, too threatened to support you, and too selfish to stay and be the father our children needed." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. Do you know what the worst part was, Marcus? It wasn't that you left. Relationships end, people fall out of love. I could have survived that. The worst part was that you made me doubt myself. For 2 years of our marriage, I questioned every idea I had because you'd convinced me I didn't understand how the real world worked. You made me smaller so you could feel bigger. Marcus flinched. I know. But you were wrong, Sarah continued, and now there was steel in her voice. I did understand the real world, better than you did apparently, because while you were focused on handshakes and golf games and pretending technology didn't matter, I was building something that would change an entire industry. She walked to her desk, picked up a frame photo, the triplets from their 5th birthday party. Emma wants to be an engineer. Olivia wants to start her own company. Jackson wants to study logistics and supply chains. They're 5 years old, Marcus, and they already have dreams and ambitions and ideas. Do you know why? Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. Because I've never told them they can't. I've never dismissed their ideas or made them feel small. I've taught them that if you work hard enough and believe in yourself enough, you can build anything. Sarah set down the photo and looked at Marcus directly. You asked what the worst part was. It wasn't that you left, it was that you tried to convince me I wasn't enough, that my ideas were ridiculous, that nobody would take me seriously, that I didn't understand how things really worked. She smiled, but it was sad. I proved you wrong, Marcus, but I didn't do it for you. I did it for me, and for Emma, Olivia, and Jackson, to show them that when someone tells you you're not enough, you don't have to believe them. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. I'm so sorry, Sarah, for all of it, for leaving, for the things I said, for missing 5 years of our children's lives. I can't fix any of it, and I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I was wrong about everything. Sarah was quiet again, studying him. My partners are buying me out, Marcus continued. After the Apex implementation stabilizes things, they're purchasing my stake. I'm leaving Richardson Transport. Why? Because they were right. I've been the problem, not the solution. And I need to figure out who I want to be now that I can't hide behind the company anymore. He took a breath. I'd also like to try to be a real father to Emma, Olivia, and Jackson. Not jumping in and disrupting their lives, but maybe starting slowly, regular visits, being present, learning who they actually are. Sarah considered this. They barely know you, Marcus. You can't just decide you want to be a father now and expect them to welcome you with open arms. I know, but I'd like to try, if you'll allow it. This isn't about what I'll allow, Sarah said firmly. This is about what's best for them. They have a stable, happy life. They don't need a father who's going to show up, make grand promises, and disappear again when it gets hard. I won't disappear, Marcus said. I'm not asking to be dad overnight. I'm asking for a chance to show them that I can be someone they want to know, even if that takes years. Sarah walked back to the window, looking out at the city. If you want to be part of their lives, you need to understand something. Emma, Olivia, and Jackson are not projects you can fix or businesses you can turn around. They're people with feelings and memories and questions about why their father wasn't there when they needed him. I understand. Do you? Sarah turned to face him. Because at some point, probably sooner than you think, they're going to ask me why you left, why you weren't at their birth, why you missed their first words and first steps, and every milestone that mattered. And I'm going to tell them the truth, Marcus, not a cruel version, but the honest one. That you were scared, and you made a choice that hurt all of us. Marcus nodded. That's fair, that's the truth. So, if you want to try to be in their lives, you need to be ready for that conversation, for the questions, for the fact that they might be angry with you or confused or not want anything to do with you, and you can't take that personally because you earned it. I know, Marcus said, and I'm willing to face it, whatever it takes. Sarah studied him for a long moment, and Marcus couldn't tell what she was thinking. Finally, she walked to her desk and pulled out a business card. This is Dr. Patricia Chen. She's a family therapist who specializes in complicated parental relationships. If you're serious about this, you'll call her. You'll do the work to understand how to approach Emma, Olivia, and Jackson in a way that doesn't damage them further. And when Dr. Chen thinks you're ready, I'll consider supervised visits. She handed Marcus the card. But understand this, my children's well-being comes first. Always. If at any point I believe you're hurting them rather than helping, I'll cut off access completely. They deserve better than a part-time father who shows up when it's convenient. Marcus took the card, his hand shaking slightly. Thank you, Sarah. I'll call her today. Good. Sarah glanced at her watch. Your 10 minutes are up. I have a board call. Marcus turned to leave, then paused at the door. Sarah, can I ask you something? One question. Do you ever regret it? The way things happened, I mean. If I'd been different, if I'd supported you from the start, do you ever wonder what might have been? Sarah was quiet for so long, Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. When she did, her voice was thoughtful. Sometimes. But then I think about who I am now, what I've built, the strength I discovered in myself when I had no choice but to be strong. And I realized that if things had been different, I might never have found out what I was truly capable of. She met his eyes one last time. You didn't believe in me, Marcus, so I learned to believe in myself, and that turned out to be more powerful than any support you could have given me. Marcus nodded, understanding. He left Apex Solutions that day feeling both worse and better than when he'd arrived. Worse because he fully understood what he'd lost and could never get back. Better because for the first time in 5 years, he'd stopped lying to himself about who he'd been and what he'd done. The truth hurt. But it was also, finally, a place to start. 6 months passed. Marcus sold his stake in Richardson Transport to Jennifer and Michael, as planned. The company, now fully integrated with Apex Solutions platform, had stabilized and was beginning to grow again. Marcus used part of the proceeds to start a small consultancy helping family businesses with succession planning, drawing on his own experience as a cautionary tale. But more importantly, Marcus had spent those 6 months working with Dr. Chen. He'd attended therapy twice a week, examining his own fears and insecurities, understanding the patterns that had led him to abandon his family. It was painful work, forcing him to confront parts of himself he'd been avoiding for years. 3 months into therapy, Dr. Chen told him he was ready to try a supervised visit with Emma, Olivia, and Jackson. Sarah arranged for them to meet at a neutral location, a family-friendly restaurant with a play area where the children would feel comfortable. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, his hands sweating despite the cool autumn weather. When Sarah walked in with the triplets, Marcus's breath caught. They'd grown so much in just 6 months. Emma was taller, Olivia had cut her hair short, and Jackson was wearing glasses now that made him look impossibly scholarly for a 6-year-old. Hi, Mr. Marcus, Emma said politely. The greeting still hurt, but Marcus had prepared for it. Hi, Emma, Olivia, Jackson, thank you for meeting with me. They sat down, and for the first few minutes, conversation was awkward. The children were polite but distant, answering Marcus's questions with short responses. Then Jackson, bless him, asked a question that changed everything. Mr. Marcus, why weren't you at my birthday party? The directness of it, the simple honesty, made Marcus's throat tight. He'd been preparing for this question with Dr. Chen, but that didn't make it easier to answer. That's a really good question, Jackson, and you deserve an honest answer. Marcus looked at all 3 children, then at Sarah, who nodded slightly, permission to continue. When you 3 were born, I was scared. Being a dad is a big responsibility, and I didn't think I was ready for it. So I made a really bad choice. I left, and I missed out on being part of your lives. But why were you scared? Olivia asked, her head tilted in genuine curiosity. Because I thought I might not be a good dad. I thought I might fail, and that scared me so much that I ran away instead of trying. Emma, the sharp one, wasn't satisfied with that answer. But Mommy was scared too. She told us that having 3 babies at once was really scary, but she didn't run away. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. You're absolutely right, Emma. Your mom was incredibly brave. She stayed and did all the hard work, even when it was scary. I wasn't brave like her, and that's something I'm very sorry about. Are you still scared? Jackson asked, pushing his glasses up his nose, a gesture so earnest it broke Marcus's heart. A little bit, Marcus admitted. But now I'm more scared of missing out on knowing you 3, of never getting to hear about what you're learning in school or what games you like to play, or what you want to be when you grow up. The children looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that siblings sometimes have. Finally, Emma spoke again. Mommy says you want to be our friend. Is that true? Marcus glanced at Sarah, grateful for how she'd framed this. Yes, I'd like to be your friend. I know I'm your father biologically, but I understand I haven't earned the right to be called Dad. So, if you'd like, I'd be honored to just be your friend Marcus, someone who shows up and spends time with you and cares about your lives. Olivia considered this. Friends spend time together. Would you come to my soccer games? Every single one you'd let me come to, Marcus promised. Friends also help with homework, Emma added, testing him. Would you help with math? I would try my best. And if I couldn't figure it out, we'd learn together. Jackson had been quiet, thinking hard. Friends don't leave when things get hard, he said finally, and the wisdom in those words from a 6-year-old nearly destroyed Marcus. You're right, Marcus said, his voice thick. Real friends don't leave, and if you give me the chance, I promise I won't leave again. Even when things are hard, even when I make mistakes, and I will make mistakes, I'll stay and try to do better. The triplets looked at Sarah, seeking her guidance. She'd been quiet through the entire exchange, letting them ask their questions, but now she spoke. What do you three think? Would you like to spend some time with Marcus and see if he can be a good friend? 3 small heads nodded, cautiously but genuinely. Okay, Emma said, but you have to prove it. That's fair, Marcus agreed. How about we start small? Maybe I could come to your school's family fun night next week. Your mom mentioned it's next Friday. Mommy's bringing cupcakes for our class, Jackson said, warming up slightly. She makes really good cupcakes. Your mom is excellent at everything she does, Marcus said, looking at Sarah. That's something I should have realized a long time ago. Sarah's expression softened slightly, though she didn't smile. This wasn't about her forgiving Marcus. This was about giving their children a chance to know their father, if he could prove himself worthy of that relationship. The lunch continued, gradually becoming less awkward. Marcus asked about school, about their interests, and actually listened to the answers. He learned that Emma loved building things with Legos and wanted to design bridges someday, that Olivia was the fastest runner in her class and dreamed of being in the Olympics, that Jackson loved reading and could already sound out words that most first graders struggled with. When it was time to leave, the children hugged Sarah but only waved goodbye to Marcus. He understood. Trust wasn't given freely, it had to be earned, one interaction at a time. True to his word, Marcus showed up to the school's family fun night the following Friday. He helped set up, played games with the triplets and their classmates, and stayed for the entire event. When Emma's Lego tower won the building competition, Marcus cheered as loudly as any parent there. He came to Olivia's soccer games, even the ones in the rain. He helped Jackson practice reading, sitting patiently while the boys sounded out challenging words. He showed up for school performances, parent-teacher conferences, and casual weekend visits at parks and museums. It wasn't easy. The children had been raised by Sarah alone for 6 years, and they had a rhythm and dynamic that Marcus had to learn to fit into rather than disrupt. There were moments when he felt like an outsider, watching a family unit that functioned perfectly well without him. But he kept showing up. 3 months after that first supervised visit, something changed. Marcus had come to pick up the triplets for a Saturday morning trip to the Science Museum. Sarah had decided supervised visits weren't necessary anymore, though Marcus knew she was tracking their locations on her phone and was only a 10-minute drive away. As they were leaving Sarah's house, Jackson had tripped on the front steps and scraped his knee badly. He'd started crying, and Marcus had knelt down immediately, checking the injury with gentle hands. "Hey buddy, it's okay. We're going to get you cleaned up." He'd carried Jackson inside, cleaned and bandaged the scrape while Sarah got the first aid kit and sat with him until the tears stopped. "Does it still hurt?" Marcus had asked. Jackson had nodded, then said something that changed everything. "Will you stay with me until it feels better, Dad?" The room went silent. Emma and Olivia looked at their brother in surprise. Sarah, standing in the doorway, had frozen. Jackson seemed to realize what he'd said and looked uncertain. "Is it okay if I call you Dad?" Marcus had looked at Sarah, tears streaming down his face. She'd nodded, just slightly. "It's more than okay," Marcus had whispered, pulling Jackson into a careful hug. "It's the greatest honor of my life." From that day forward, things weren't perfect. Families never are, but they were real. Marcus remained an active presence in his children's lives. He and Sarah maintained a cordial, co-parenting relationship built on mutual respect and their shared commitment to Emma, Olivia, and Jackson's well-being. Sarah's company continued to grow. By 2025, Apex Solutions had been valued at over $1.3 billion. She'd been approached by multiple companies wanting to acquire Apex, but she'd turned them all down. She loved what she'd built, loved the impact it was having, loved showing her children that you could build something meaningful and successful while maintaining your values. Marcus, for his part, had found purpose in his consulting work. He specialized in helping entrepreneurs avoid the mistakes he had made, letting fear drive decisions, undervaluing partners' contributions, prioritizing ego over growth. He'd never be as successful as Sarah, but he'd found something more important: integrity and self-awareness. Richardson Transport, under Jennifer and Michael's leadership and powered by Apex Solutions platform, had become one of the most successful regional logistics companies in New England. Sarah had eventually reduced Apex's percentage take as the company hit performance milestones, redirecting those savings to employee profit sharing exactly as she'd promised. Jennifer and Michael had sent her a bottle of champagne when they'd closed their most profitable year ever, with a note that simply said, "Thank you for saving us from ourselves." On Emma, Olivia, and Jackson's 7th birthday, both Marcus and Sarah attended the party together. They weren't friends exactly, but they'd reached a place of mutual understanding and respect. Sarah had done the impossible, built an empire while raising 3 children alone. Marcus had done something almost as difficult, admitted he was wrong, and spent years proving he could change. At one point during the party, while the children were playing with their friends, Marcus and Sarah found themselves standing together near the snack table. "They're amazing," Marcus said, watching the triplets lead a complicated game involving superhero, capes, and a scavenger hunt. "You raised 3 amazing humans, Sarah." "We're raising them," Sarah corrected gently. "You've been showing up. That matters. I have a lot of years to make up for." "Yes, you do, but you're doing the work." Sarah paused, then added, "For what it's worth, I think you're becoming the father they deserve. It took you a while to get there, but you're trying. That's more than a lot of people do." It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was acknowledgement, recognition. And for Marcus, who'd spent years living with the weight of his own failures, it felt like grace. Emma ran over, grabbing both their hands. "Mom, Dad, come play. We need adults for the dragon rescue." And they did, both of them, playing an elaborate game invented by their 7-year-olds. For that afternoon, in a backyard filled with laughter and birthday cake, and children who knew they were loved, the past felt less heavy, and the future felt possible. Sarah had learned that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up every single time. Marcus had learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to be better every single day going forward. And Emma, Olivia, and Jackson were learning the most important lesson of all, that people are complicated, that mistakes don't define you, and that love, real love, shows up even when it's difficult. Years later, when the triplets were teenagers, Emma would ask Sarah about those early days. "Mom, were you angry when you had to ask Dad for help after he left?" Sarah would think carefully before answering. "I never asked your father for help, sweetheart. I built my company and raised you 3 without needing him. But when he wanted to be part of your lives, I let him try, because you deserve the chance to know him." "Do you regret giving him that chance?" Sarah would look at her brilliant, thoughtful daughter and smile. "No, because you 3 gained a father who learned how to show up. And I learned something important too, that forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you. It's about freeing yourself to build something beautiful anyway." "Did you forgive him?" Emma would press. "I released the anger," Sarah would say carefully. "I stopped letting what he did define my story. That's not quite the same as forgiveness, but it's what I needed to move forward." Emma would nod, understanding more than most teenagers about complicated relationships and second chances. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom." Strength isn't about doing everything alone, Emma. It's about knowing when to stand on your own and when to let people in. The trick is learning the difference. Those conversations were still years away, though. On this particular afternoon, as Sarah watched her 7-year-old children play with the father who'd finally learned to show up, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because the past had been erased or the hurt had disappeared completely, but because she'd built something beautiful from the wreckage. 3 incredible children, a company that mattered, and a life that was entirely her own. Marcus had mocked her ideas. The business world had underestimated her. She'd been left pregnant and alone with nothing but a laptop and a dream that most people thought was ridiculous, and she'd proven every single one of them wrong. Not with bitterness or revenge, but with competence, with intelligence, with the quiet, relentless determination of someone who refuses to let someone else's limitations become her own. That evening, after the party ended and Marcus had left with promises to see the triplets later that week, Sarah tucked her children into bed one by one. Emma first, with her engineering books already stacked on her nightstand. Then Olivia, who fell asleep still wearing her soccer medal from last week's game. Finally Jackson, who made her read 2 extra chapters because the story was too exciting to stop. When they were all asleep, Sarah returned to her home office, a converted spare bedroom with the same laptop she'd used to build the first version of Foresight all those years ago. She kept it there as a reminder. On the desk was a framed photo from that business meeting where she'd confronted Marcus. Not the confrontation itself, but a picture someone had taken afterward, Sarah with Emma, Olivia, and Jackson in the Apex Solutions Visitors Lounge, all 4 of them laughing at something Jackson had said. She'd had it framed not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what mattered most. Next to it was the business card Marcus had left behind that day, the one he'd tried to give her with his contact information, as if she'd ever need to call him for anything business-related. She'd kept it as a different kind of reminder of how far she'd come, how much she'd overcome, and how little she'd needed him after all. Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up Apex Solutions' quarterly reports. The numbers were strong. Client retention was at 92%. Employee satisfaction scores were the highest they had been in company history. They were expanding into European markets next year, and 3 major universities had reached out about licensing the Foresight algorithm for research purposes. But more than any of that, Sarah had something that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or valuations. She had her self-respect. She had 3 children who knew their mother was brilliant and strong and capable. She had proof, undeniable and concrete, that she was exactly as smart and capable as she'd always believed she was. The world had tried to make Sarah small. Marcus had tried to convince her she wasn't enough. Fear and circumstances had tried to break her. But Sarah Bennett had refused to stay down. She'd taken the worst moment of her life and used it as fuel to build something extraordinary. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all, not proving Marcus wrong, but proving to herself that she'd been right all along. So here's a question for you, watching this story unfold. What would you have done in Sarah's position? When Marcus walked back into her life, desperate for the very expertise he'd once mocked, would you have helped him? Or would you have walked away? And if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told your dreams were ridiculous, what did you do? Did you let it stop you, or did you let it fuel you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and share your own story of proving someone wrong, not with anger, but with achievement, because that's what this story is really about. It's not about revenge or bitterness. It's about the quiet power of refusing to let someone else's limitations define your potential. Sarah didn't need Marcus to believe in her. She learned to believe in herself. And that belief, that absolute unshakable certainty in her own capabilities, was more powerful than any support he could have offered. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own journey or the people who didn't believe in you when they should have, hit that like button. Subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Stories about real people facing impossible situations and finding strength they didn't know they had. And remember, the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's becoming so successful that their opinion stops mattering entirely. Sarah didn't build a billion-dollar company to spite Marcus. She built it because she was brilliant, capable, and refused to accept anyone else's version of what she could achieve. That's not revenge. That's self-respect. And it's the most powerful thing you can build. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.